going to be well behaved.
Hello, I'm James Hadley, Executive Director of Musical Theatre Network. Thank you for joining us for this event this evening. I am a white male with a beard, wearing a dark blue shirt, sitting in my kitchen. And as I said, I'm from MTN. This is the second in a series of online panel discussions under the title Creating Consciously. The lovely Meg McGrady approached us about partnering on this series of discussions about inclusivity in theatre and musical theatre. This is something that increasingly we're having conversations. I think all of us are having conversations about what is best practice, how are things evolving, how can we be more inclusive within all areas of workshopping, rehearsals, backstage, casting, looking at who we're working with, how we're making our processes creatively at any stage of the creative process and the production process and the touring process, how are we making them more inclusive? And Meg's brilliant idea was that each session would look at a different protected characteristic or identity or cultural or perspective or a group of identities from which to consider what is best practice, what's evolving best practice, and talking to practitioners about their own personal experiences in the industry so that it's not some formal directive, but rather talking about how evolving best practice is actually being experienced by practitioners working in the industry. The first session was brilliant and is available on YouTube on the MTN YouTube channel looking at trans identities. And tonight's conversation is about queer LGBTQ plus identities and how to be more inclusive in theatre and musical theatre of those identities. And so, yeah, we're delighted to have you joining us tonight for this discussion. And without further ado, I will pass you over to Meg.
Hello folks, my name is Meg McGrady. I use they, them pronouns. I am a thin, white, androgynous person with short, shaved brown hair and a lovely big red dress on today. And yes, welcome to Creating Consciously, the second panel, Queer Identities. For those of you who don't know, queer identities, queer is an umbrella term which covers lots of different identities within the LGBTQ plus spectrum. We are using the term queer today, which we've checked with all our panelists. I know that some people might not be comfortable with that term, but just for the sake of ease in this panel, we're going to be using that. For those of you who don't know what LGBTQ plus stands for, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer. And the plus is symbolic of a bunch of other identities, including pansexuality, asexuality, and more. A bit about me, I am a producer, composer, and general creative. I do a lot of things, performer as well. And yes, and I'm also a queer ace person, so that's where I sit within this panel. And I am joined by three lovely guests. I'm going to pass over to Lucy first to give us a little introduction about yourself.
Hello, my name is Lucy. I use she, her pronouns. I am a plus size cisgender white woman and I have long wavy blonde hair and I'm wearing a yellow dress. I'm here as a sort of writer, producer, performer, anything and everything, mostly as part of our theatre company, Queerly Productions, which I run with the lovely Meg McGrady. We're a theatre company dedicated to creating space in musical theatre for queer women and trans people. So basically, if you are not a cisgender man and you identify as queer, you are very welcome to come and perform with us. Yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. But I'm really looking forward to today and chatting to you all about all of the exciting ways that we can implement queer inclusion across the musical theatre space.
Amazing, thank you. I'm now going to pass to Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a plus size mixed race person wearing a black vest and my hair is slicked back. I'm currently playing Effie on the UK tour of Dreamgirls, and that is about it.
Thank you. And finally, we have the lovely Evie.
Hello. Can you hear me? Is my microphone working? That's good to know. I'm Evie. My pronouns are she, her. I am a cisgender woman with brunette hair in a red top, sitting in my bedroom with a lovely dog sleeping peacefully behind me. And I just a few months ago finished a run of the new musical of the iconic queer film masterpiece, But I'm a Cheerleader, at the Turbine.
Amazing. Right. So the reason I wanted to host this discussion is because as much as there is lots of cis gay representation, particularly of men, I wanted to focus kind of on the more marginalized identities who often get overlooked in musical theatre, just where we're kind of starting this discussion from. But I wanted to start at light. So first of all, if you could queer any role or any show to take part in, which musical theatre show would you pick? I'm trying to think. I have not thought about my own. Have I thought about my own? I've always said I wanted to play Peter Pan in a very obscure musical called Darling, just because I feel like I want to give some non-binary rep back to Peter Pan.
Well, that was always like, I always thought one of the earliest forms of that I thought was kind of amazing. I remember as a kid when I'd go to Panto and you always had like such a variety of genders playing the leads. And there was always, it was like in my hometown, there was this amazing woman who would play like all the leads every year. It didn't matter what character it was. And I remember her Peter Pan to this day. And I think it's so interesting that early in Panto, like they were already, you know, Panto is a whole hullabaloo. So that's so funny you say Peter Pan, because I always associate it with being kind of, you know, existing outside of gender norms anyway, because of her name was Sally and I love her.
Also, just to bring it back to like history, Peter Pan was originally played by a cisgender woman who so happened to be a lesbian. So bringing it back to its real roots really is what I just want to do.
Peter Pan, queer canon. Who knew?
Right.
Queer canon.
Right, should we answer your question?
Adams.
I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking of it.
I planned this in advance.
Of course you did.
Yeah, because like I'm type A personality. So I was thinking about this, and the production of Legally Blonde that was just at Regent's Park Open Air, Lucy Moss did an unbelievable job. I feel like the only thing that could have made it better, let's make Emmet a woman. Let's have a queer romance at the center of it, right?
Yeah.
Let's have like a plus size blonde woman who like thinks her life is like going to go one way, like she wants to get engaged to this man. She's probably a Republican, let's be real. And then she goes to Harvard and then she meets this unbelievably intelligent, driven woman, and she's like, this is what I've been missing. I feel like there's so much to do with queering Legally Blonde even further. Also, give me a trans Paulette. I feel like that makes so much sense with her story. Like, yeah, give me a trans Paulette and give me a queer ass Elle.
I love it. I love it. Love it. Yeah, and also if you didn't get to see that production, you missed out on such a treat because it was so good and so queer already. I mean, there was like even just that moment during Warner's solo song, and we're having all the picnics and all the couples were just of different genders, and I was like, this is lovely. This is just some subtle background stuff, but at least you're acknowledging this. It's just really nice.
Yeah, I loved how queer it was, but I was like, can we make it gayer? Make it gayer.
Let's go further. That's so funny.
Any other shows or roles?
I was thinking it'd be really funny to do like I mean, I always love like subverted versions of like old, really traditional things. But my friend was the other day was saying how he was in Seven Brides and Seven Brothers at school. And I was like, imagine how funny making that gay would be. Also, I also Kiss Me Kate was a very obvious show to like take in that direction. I was obsessed with that. Like she sings a song that she begins called I Hate Men. Like let's continue that trajectory. Like I don't even just hate them, I just literally want nothing to do with it. Just like, so I always thought that was, even when I was really young, I was like, this is kind of gay, right? Like she hates men. So,
I did it at high school as well, and just like I was like, the character, is it Bill, who's the one that gets sung Why Can't You Behave At? I was like, you also give just like trans energy. I can't explain it, but yeah, it's just could be I mean, you need to do something with that production to justify reviving it, because otherwise it is just straight, it does not work.
Yeah. I know, but it's so easy it would be such an easy like adaptation, I think, to make and to modernize it, as lots of those are, why they often are, I think, is why they're brought back. But it would be so easy to just kind of give it a kick in the arse and freshen it up.
For me, I'm very much a hopeless romantic, and I love Emily Dickinson more than anything in the entire world. And I'm not sure if anyone's seen the series. I mean, it's gay as hell, so you must have, but Dickinson on Apple TV. I want like a musical adaptation of it, and I want to play Emily Dickinson. I feel like it'd be really cool to like revamp and like modernize the way Six was done, just like allow anyone to play those characters. Yeah.
Can we come? Can I be in it too?
Yeah, of course you can.
Thanks.
Just because that brought a memory back to me, there is a great new musical being written at the moment called, oh my god, what is it called? The name is flung from my head, but I will look it up in a minute. But basically it's based on the true story of two lesbians back in like the 1800s. It's gorgeous. It's written by like two young queer writers. I can't even. It just sounds like, what is it called? Two something ladies.
Isn't it?
Really
oh yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I can't remember though.
I really should know, because I know the right, but I'll come back to that at some point later. But on to the next question. When have you felt most welcome in a theatre setting as a queer person, and how can we emulate that in future productions in the future, is essentially the next one, because I wanted to first of all focus on some of the positive experiences of how can we make sure that people feel welcomed in rooms. How can we make sure that people feel welcome within productions?
So, not to blow my own trumpet, but I honestly think, like, when we were doing our first show with Queerly, we were doing Sing Queerly Me, we had like a room for like all of our performers were queer. We had a group of eight women, non-binary people and trans people, and I just felt like, I think I'm very used to being the only queer person in the room. I'm very used to being the only voice, or especially the only queer woman in a room, or like a person of a marginalized gender. And it was just so lovely to find myself surrounded by other people who shared those experiences, and I felt like I didn't have to explain myself. I was just with people who understood. And I suppose how we emulate that in other contexts is just, I think it's about making audition spaces and rehearsal spaces safer for queer people. So no queer person ever feels like they're alone. No queer person ever feels like they are the only queer person in the room. Like, let's train up more people to be allies, so if they are the only person in the room, they don't feel so alone. But yeah, just more queer people everywhere, please, and thank you. That's my answer.
For me, this is kind of sounds depressing, but it's not. I've never really truly felt accepted as a queer person in the industry. I have in my own circles and the friends I've made in the industry, but that's just a given because all my circles are queer. But like, I've never auditioned for a queer part ever. I've never been in a queer show, and these are things that I've wanted and I feel like I need to do. But I think on paper, people just assume that I'm this like straight Black person, so why would I do anything queer? So as far as the industry goes, I've never truly felt welcomed as a queer person in the industry, because I don't fit the stereotypical queer image or whatever. It is changing though, and I think that's because I've allowed myself to take up more space with who I am, and I've allowed myself to enter those spaces that are very queer, whereas before I would have been a bit reluctant or just comfortable with being booked, I guess. So it's changing, definitely changing for my own journey. And within the actual industry, but yeah, kind of sad. I have never felt kind of welcomed.
Do you feel like the inability of people to like necessarily automatically see you in queer roles is like partly like an intersection with race? Like, do you think that plays a part in it?
100%. And I think, I mean, I'm pansexual, but I think people assume queer women, especially if they're Black, are studs or very masked. And yeah, I've kind of fluttered between the two, like high femme and mask, but I think people only assume it's one way. So I'm straight away eliminated from being seen as a queer person. Yeah, which kind of sucks. For the industry that you love so much and you give so much to. Yeah, that's hard. But I think the circles that I've chosen with people in this industry, oh my gosh, like the best cycles ever.
Similarly, I feel that very, very similar thing of like every non-binary casting call you get is like, they're very androgynous, they look this way, and like they're like not in a box. And I'm like, but I also like to be femme sometimes, I like to be masked sometimes. I'm not automatically always non-binary androgynous.
Because also non-binary is not a definition of, non-binary isn't an aesthetic. Non-binary is who you are as a person. It's not a fashion sense. It's not how you look. And I think the sooner people get their minds around that lesbian women are not only butch, that non-binary people aren't androgynous. Like, I think the sooner people get their minds around that, the more incredible our spaces will be.
Queerness is never an aesthetic, it's an identity, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Evie? Do you have anything?
I mean, I've been in so many in the kind of the same lane audition rooms where I get feedback and it's like, you look kind of too womanly, basically saying like you've got boobs, you kind of have like, you look a bit girly, so you can't play. And then they'll cast a straight person, which is always interesting when you see the casting and you're like, oh. But they were like, oh, I'm sorry that you could kind of see your boobs, so you obviously can't play a lesbian. I'm really sorry. Like, it's like so bad. It's quite baffling. It was really, but I mean, in regards to feeling, you know, comfortably queer in theatrical spaces, doing But I'm a Cheerleader in the in the first half of this year was obviously very gay, and it was almost an entirely queer cast and team. So it was I think that it was aside from I think 2 or 3 cast, and almost all the creatives were queer, so that was really exciting. And I think a lot of people who were actually like older than me in the cast, like the older members of the cast, particularly felt that the impact of that, who had been waiting for a long time for something like that, and who didn't. My friend Ollie, who's so fantastic and so brilliant, he's hilarious, and he said he'd always felt very embarrassed to be like queer in a lot of spaces, and it was the first time he'd been in a rehearsal room and had not felt embarrassed. So I think that was, as somebody who'd been waiting for like 2 decades to have that kind of circle of people, it was a very, very, it's uniquely, it brings people uniquely close together, I think, shared queerness, and it makes you very deeply protective of each other. It feels very familial. It was very unique and special, and yeah, especially given I think the queerness was something that really, you know, made us a united front, which was really, really lovely and insane. And insane. It's so funny, but yeah, it was really great. It was very special. I think it's about, as Lucy said, I think just like having more of it, you know, like allowing more like theatre that would bring about those kind of, you know, those casting opportunities more often, I think is the key to it, essentially.
Since you brought it up and briefly mentioned on straight people playing queer people, I was curious about other people's opinions. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about straight people playing queer people. For example, like James Corden in The Prom a little while ago, playing that very stereotypical gay man. So I was curious, do you think straight people can play queer characters, or is it merely a case of prioritizing queer performers with straight performers still allowed to audition, or is it like a case by case kind of basis?
So first things first, I feel like you need to separate like queer in terms of gender and queer in terms of sexuality, right? Like
that is true. Yeah.
Gender, literally never okay. Like never cast this cisgender man as a trans woman and like put him in a wig, because it like perpetuates so many harmful stereotypes, like the idea that like a trans woman is just a man in a wig. Like that's not what's going on. And especially when there are so few opportunities for trans people in theatre, especially non-binary people as well, like we should not be giving those opportunities away, especially when providing cis straight people with those opportunities is going to be so damaging. When it comes to like queerness more generally, I think queer people should 100% be prioritized in the casting process, but at the same time I think there are other things that might need to be considered more. So if, for example, we're looking to cast like a person of color who is also disabled and also queer, I think we need to think about like the reality of being able to find somebody who fits within all those intersections and sort of prioritize. Like it's far less offensive for a straight person to play a queer person than it is for a white person to like put on blackface. Like that, like there are opportunities and places where sometimes it can be the lesser of two evils, but I think wherever possible queer performers need to be prioritized. And right now I think there are a lot of excuses made. There's a lot of the queer talent just doesn't exist, and that's not true. Like we can see, like from the people in this room, we can see that's not true. So I think it's about, if it's an absolute last resort, fine, but realistically I don't think it has to be a last resort, and I think directors and producers need to be doing more to pursue queer talent.
I think also open spaces don't, with castings, I think especially now people just only go through agents, allow space for like open calls, going to like schools to find people, because a lot of the time queer people aren't represented as heavily as non-queer people are with agents. So actively search for those people. Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen the. Oh no, you go.
You continue on.
I was just going to mention, we've seen, for example, how successful that was with Heartstopper recently, in terms of obviously they did a big open casting call for that, and they had some amazing young queer performers that they found through that.
Yeah, I think it's, I completely agree with that. I think you do sometimes have to seek it. I think it's really important to put in the effort to search, and obviously the talent exists. I think it was I agree with Lucy. I think like it's always a useless excuse to say like the talent doesn't exist. I think, and obviously I don't think there's any question if it was gender. It just seems like a bit of, it seems not really offensive, it's just lazy. I think though, often what I do feel, I will see, you'll see casting like that's so great, it's really like very diverse, like true to character casting, and then you look behind and you look at the creatives and it's just like 7 white gay men. And I actually think like a lot of the time, if those if the teams behind it are not reflecting the cast that you're seeing, I tend to have less faith in that, and I tend to be less convinced of the belief, the belief systems behind what's being created, because it doesn't, I think it has to start at the root, and I think it can often be a smoke screen that's thrown up to distract people from the fact that actually the people running stuff behind the scenes has not really changed at all. And I think ultimately, unless you have work being commissioned from more like diverse group of artists and writers and creatives, it seems like you're just touching this, you're just barely touching the surface. I think it's so important that it has to go all the way through every single level. I think it's not often as much of a priority to me to see, like, I don't know if that even makes any sense, but when I don't think there's, I've seen not cis people, straight people play queer roles with great who really care and are given a lot of time and effort, and then I've learned about teams of people who are homophobic or not particularly like kind and generous to the work, people behind the scenes of productions, and it makes me go, I don't really I don't really care what you're pretending to be doing. It's what's actually about, what's coming from the soul of it, from the heart of the machine, that I think is actually the most imperative, and then work up from there, rather than pretending to hiding behind your website announcements and using black and white headshots.
I was going to say, if it isn't integrated at all levels, then you're just doing something very surface level. I remember being so surprised when I found out, again, the prom is written by 3 men, and I was really surprised to find this like very queer lesbian story written by 3 men. Yeah, it just kind of was like, why is that? Why is there not even like a book writer or a lyricist? It's like the 3 people at the top. Yeah,
I can't remember who the director was of the movie. It was Ryan Murphy, wasn't it?
Yes.
Good. My point is, I rest my case.
Just to like jump on before we like land in the Ryan Murphy slander, which I normally say.
I'm ready for it. Let's go.
I'm just like nuance the issue a little bit. I remember having a conversation with Ricky Beadle-Blair, who runs Team Angelica, and he was talking about like casting a show with like all black queer people, but he said like quite a lot of them weren't necessarily out. Some people came into the process sort of curious about their sexuality, and through performing in that show they kind of came to terms with their sexuality. And like I think it is really important that we're not like gatekeeping queerness. We're not telling people they aren't queer enough. Like sometimes like performing in a queer role can be a really fundamental part of somebody's journey and like understanding who they are. So like it's not necessarily 100% straightforward, like, but I think the issue comes when people aren't making the effort.
I think as well, for me, it comes from a context thing as well. If the show explores, the story is centered around queerness, and it's like that is the main, it's like a coming out journey, or it's like that is what the show is about, and it's like a really big role for a queer person, and you've cast someone who's very clearly straight and isn't considering that journey at all, then that feels very wrong. But that's very different if it's like a side character that is like just so happens to have a partner, if it's like a running TV show kind of thing, and it's just this one little thing that comes up briefly. Like I feel like there's a big difference in the context of writing as well, of this is just something like small, that it's not like a big part of their story, but equally like compare that to like being a big coming out journey where that is very much the core of it. Let's have another question. So what barriers do you think has stopped queer people from applying and getting jobs within theatre, and how can we work to remove those barriers? We've kind of touched on this briefly, saying that there are barriers there, but how can we work to remove them, do you think?
I think a lot of what we were saying about there being sort of one way to look queer is like really really fundamental to this. Like I'm a fat woman with long hair, so people are like, oh yeah, if we are only casting one queer character, we want someone who actually looks gay. I feel like I don't look gay enough to be cast as queer characters, but at the same time I'm not like straight passing enough or skinny enough or like any of those things to ever be cast as a romantic lead, or like, so I feel like those things are really difficult. Like I had an experience when I was at drama school where I went into an audition for it was for Paulette and Legally Blonde, and the director was kind of like, can you dyke it up a bit? And I was like, oh, I know what she's doing. She knows I'm the only queer person in the school. She knows exactly where she's going to put me. And then used the word dyke about 6 times in my audition, which obviously like threw me off and made me feel like absolute rubbish. I was then eventually cast as the only lesbian in the show, and I was like, okay, like let me put my stamp on it. She like dressed me in dungarees and Doc Martens and like chucked me a copy of Jermaine Greer and was like, can we make your hair look shorter? Like, and it was like this like pretense of like inclusive casting, and it was like where I was going to sit in that show was dictated by my queerness, but also the way that I had to do it was dictated to me by straight people, and that was really terrible. But then at the same time I know people who are like quite visibly queer, like especially a lot of my non-binary friends, or like my friends who are like more stereotypically like butch looking, also face issues where they're like, well, I could never play a straight character because people don't believe me. So I think a lot of it comes down to that like really like horrifically like surface level like aesthetic shallowness, where people are like, you must look a certain way to be queer, there is only one way to look queer and there is only one way to look straight. And I also think, like Nicole was saying, I think that comes with a lot of intersections. I think there's also like this weird belief that you can only ever be like one marginalized identity at once, like, which is such nonsense. But there is this like belief that's like, oh, you're gay, you therefore cannot be any of these XYZ other things, which is stupid. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
I think also, I think particularly, I think when looking at like lesbian characters, particularly I think in musicals a lot, I tend to notice that it's not all the time, but very often you have the idea of a lesbian presented as if what a man would think a lesbian is. And I always think this, it's either someone who's like, that's actually just a dude like me, or someone in a bikini. So it's like, that is literally the only two kinds of lesbians who are allowed, is either someone who's almost is like just there to be hot and like for, you know, the pleasure of the beholder, or as somebody who just like, yeah, as Lucy said, like, you're wearing dungarees, I'm gonna guess that you're a lesbian. Like, it's true, like that's truly like, it's a very, I think it's about imagination. I think a lot of it is to do with imagination, and I think this even goes beyond just like queerness in casting. I think it's a very like, it encompasses like the whole, or like a huge issue in casting overall, but I think particularly pertains to queer people. And that I think people will see someone walk in a room and they won't, a lot of people behind a desk will not be able to just like imagine them, I don't know, with another like haircut or in like another, you know, they can't. I think it's about an inability to stretch the imagination to think about the other spaces that a person might be able to inhabit other than what they see directly in front of them. And I think that is a really hard one to beat. And I think it, in terms of solutions, I think it kind of rests on the other side of the table. I think it's, I genuinely like have got feedback so many times of like, oh, they just don't have this one particular physical feature, or this one, they're too this. It's like, but that's something that that can be changed. Like, you know, that's something that can be like adapted or done with costume, or like, you know, or like work through. It's very, I think there's I think it's particularly in musical theatre, there is not a lot of energy given towards, you know, generosity of imagination for the actor. I think there's a lot of stagnancy, and it's almost they don't want to. There's not a lot of effort put into being like. I just rarely see a casting and go, wow, that's such like a, you know, ingenious casting of somebody like that's kind of out of the box, but you know, makes sense. But I so rarely see that, because I think they just want to tick a box. And I think that's actually the work that has to be done, is giving more energy and time to expanding imagination in terms of casting. I think that would solve a lot of the issues.
On that, so there's a lot of comfortableness with a lot of producers and casting directors, where the way they cast and the way they do things has worked for them for 20 plus years. So why would they change it? Because it serves a group of cis people that come to see a show, pay big tickets. Why would they change that if it works? And it's also a lack of belief and trust in queer, in POC, and disabled artists, because they haven't been presented with artists that can do it, because we're not at the forefront in media, in music, we're not at the forefront. So why would they have faith and belief that we can do it? I also think it is, especially with producers, I think more and more producers need to start allowing and bringing in interns and young producers on board with them, and not just keeping it their tight group. There's so many producers that come to mind that have just run things for 30 plus years, and they sell out the shows every single day, but also it's like, you put in one POC, you put in 2 queer people, and you think you've done your job because you've ticked a box for 2022. So it's bringing on younger or people with open minds to join their production teams, who also have a vision that they might not have. Yeah, I think there's a massive laziness in this industry.
Laziness is the,
and it's so frustrating to see when you in yourself and with your like your friends, you can see this sense of urgency and this need and want for change and an urgency for like representation. And it's like the people who have the power don't have the same urgency, because why should they? And that's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing like a lack of imagination, a lack of faith. We need to bring on new producers, and also just having conversations with the queer people if you're not queer yourselves when you're developing a show. Like, don't assume that just because someone's a lesbian they want to wear dungarees and Doc Martens. Like, to kind of sum up some of those wonderful points that you all put so eloquently and beautifully. Next up, do you think that there are opportunities to be open about your queerness, either in your workplace or within roles you're put up for? Or do you think there is also just not that communication as well?
I mean, I literally just tend to like shoehorn it in. I'm like, oh yeah, I just went for lunch with my girlfriend, you know. I'm just like, I'm gonna let you know that I am queer. But I think
Lucy's house, look at the behind Lucy.
Yeah, look at this.
Lucy's house, you walk into Lucy's flat and it just says like, I'm gay on the wall. Like it's like it's like
But yeah, I don't know, I think it is a tricky one though, because we don't want to like, it's that balance between that opportunity to disclose sexuality, but then also like not making people feel like they have to if they're not at that stage of their journey yet. So like, I understand that that's a delicate balance. I think the way around it is like changing the way the audition room looks. I think, like, I don't know if you guys have had this, but like if you go in for like a straight theatre audition, it's like a different experience. Like, you like sit down and they chat to you and they're like, oh, what did you think of the script? Like, they get to know you as a person. Whereas in musical theatre, it's just such a cattle call. It's like one in, one out. You do the thing, you prepare like 18 pages, you get to sing for maybe 4 seconds. Like, there's just not that same desire to like get to know people and dig deeper. And I think maybe in terms of like the opportunity to like talk about those things in an audition room, I think kind of comes down to like audition culture and musical theatre more generally. And I think that needs quite a drastic overhaul if we want to create space for that.
I will say on that as well, like a lot with productions that have been running for years and years definitely have that mentality of like one in, one out, let's keep going. But you notice it with a lot of productions that are at like the Hope Mill, like Open Air and stuff. Those are the ones that want to sit down and talk to you, because those are the ones slowly changing the game for a lot of performers. But the ones, I mean, like the Phantoms and the Les Mis, like, and I'll call it out, I've never been seen for either one of them. I don't want to be in them as well, so I don't have no problem calling them out. They don't give a shit. Like, they just want to see one person after another, and it's like, that's not good enough. Sorry, you put a few tokens in a show this year and you think you've done your job, and that's not good enough. Where's the care in the audition room? Because a lot of auditions you can walk out from completely traumatized, and that can completely divert your entire path in the industry. I've never been seen by a panel that's diverse. I've only ever been seen by white people in the 7 years I've worked in the industry, and it's like I've had to. I mean, now I'm starting to be seen because I'm starting to go for like TV and stuff. So now I'm seeing more diverse panels. But like in the 7 years that I've worked in the industry, I've never been seen by a person of color, a disabled person. Like, it's only been a cis white panel. So it's like, if someone who is at my level right now is still going through this, what are people who are trying to break into the industry as a person of color or a queer person experiencing? So it's everything behind the scenes. Yes, we can change everything at the forefront, but like behind the scenes, whoa, that needs to shift like so quickly.
Also, it feels like musical theatre is so behind as well. Like, I know there is still like such a long way to go, like when it comes to TV and straight theatre, but like musical theatre feels like a relic in terms of those sorts of things.
You know what, like, I was in New York a couple of months ago, and one of my friends was like, oh, we look to like the West End as like being the pioneer for change. And I literally like burst out laughing. I was like, you are having a laugh. And she was like, no, we actually, like, there's so much happening in the West End. And I was like, no, there isn't.
Where? Show me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, you're seeing on social media because the queer community are promoting like smaller productions. That's why it feels like there's so much change. But in the West End, there is no change. There's a few shows that like show and display some like diversity, but whoa, absolutely not.
No, it doesn't exist. I think in regards to the original question of like introducing sexuality, I think it can be a double-edged sword. I accidentally, well, not accidentally, that's not true. I like, what's the word? I didn't mean to. I basically like outed myself by doing like a song on the internet about like had the word lesbian in the title, so everyone was like, oh, that's a thing. So then, and inadvertently, that's the word, I inadvertently kind of put like a sticker on my head, and it was great in a lot of ways, but then it's like you start to notice. I also think because and then I've done a few things to do with, you know, mental illness and neurodiversity, and you start to notice that your casting bracket becomes surprisingly repetitive, and that it's like it will just be like, you know, like autistic, bipolar, lesbian, like every single breakdown you get through. And so they start to also be like, they also lose imagination. As soon as they've like seen you do one thing, they're like, oh, there's a nice little box to put her in. And we could be like, remember that bipolar, like gay person? They're back and they're playing another one. So you like, they can profit off of that as well, of like that image that they've created of you, which then means you get put in a box. So I think makes people reluctant to be like actually that vocal about their sexuality. I think people see that happen. And mine has not been particularly drastic. I think a lot of people who have you know, been open about those kind of things. And also a friend of mine who's a very well-known musical theatre actress, incredibly talented. A few years ago, she came out as bisexual and was basically bullied off the internet. And was told like, you know, BS, like attention seeking, blah, 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 like, you know. So I think there is a reluctance to, I think particularly, I think it's more of a norm for cis men. I think it's more of a norm in theatre, but I think for a lot of, I think it can be a little bit more disconcerting, and it really shook her up. It really shook her up. And I think it's been really hard for her to like climb back on and feel more brave about it, because it just, there's a lack of belief in, I think, you know, there can be a lack of belief in people, which is just fascinating to me. But I think that fear does exist, and I was, you find yourself on the receiving end of that stuff all the time. Particularly, I think people just don't believe that, they think bisexual men are gay and that bisexual women want attention. So that is that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I think that people are can be very reluctant to talk about that stuff. I know that people don't really feel very confident about sharing it because they can just get people roll their eyes, you know.
Well, that's not like to say that being like a cisgender gay man is always necessarily easy.
No. I think in musical theatre, it's more of a norm. Like it's a space where they can like it's a, you know, it's a space.
Like a joke. It's like a running joke. But like
And I would say, bisexuality, biphobia very much exists. Even look within the canon of musical theatre roles, and you have in Rent the bisexual who is the person who is to be feared. Oh, they're cheating on you, kind of thing. Like, and that feels like baked into a lot of roles around biness. We need to shift that. I just want to say it now. Please, can we shift it?
Bleak. It's really bleak.
Shall we try and let me find a fun uplifting question after that. Let's not do the bury your gays question, not yet.
Nice one. What steps can be taken to make queer people feel welcome in rehearsal rooms? That's the opposite of what we just did.
I think we've covered that one, haven't we? I think we've done that. Have we?
Don't think so.
No, I think we have. I've got that crossed off on my list at least.
Episode of rehearsal rooms, I think we did in a
we can cover.
I mean, I took the opportunity to be like, let's use pronouns, please.
Yeah.
Let's let performers disclose their pronouns. Let's make sure that any rehearsal spaces have their gender neutral bathrooms. Let's not make assumptions about people when they're like, I've been on a date, and be like, oh my God, how was he? Like, let's not do that. And also just
in terms of addressing everyone. and not saying like, ladies, let's go and sing, gentlemen, just friends, folks, everyone. It's so easy.
So many times I've been in a room where I've been like, I'm a contra alto, so sometimes I sing the tenor line, sometimes I sing the alto line, and I've been misgendered singing both the alto and the tenor line before, so you can't win.
Also, just like off the back of that, in terms of like making like rehearsal spaces more queer inclusive, I think like just like pastoral support more generally like needs to be better in theatre. Like also like more queer people are neurodivergent, more queer people have mental health issues. Like if realistically like you're being treated really terribly from a pastoral like perspective, it's probably going to hit queer people the worst in one way or another, because there's always so many intersections. Like give people breaks, make sure people's needs are being met, make sure if somebody has extra accessibility requirements, they're being looked after. Like I had a friend who just did a tour, and they're trans, and they would like send off to a campsite in the middle of the rural countryside, and were like told to like just like go in the ladies' shower, and like just like so unsafe, and things that people just don't consider. Yeah, so like let's up the pastoral support, please, and thank you.
Especially if you're in a show that is about queerness and queer trauma, or like that kind of thing. Like you need to be really carefully held during those rehearsal processes and in those shows where things can come up like that. Yeah. If we've kind of talked about this briefly with open casting calls, but if productions are looking to include more queer people within their workforce, be they performers on the technical side or on the creative team, how best can people engage people from the queer community within job recruitment?
I mean, contact queer theatre companies. I say that as somebody who runs a queer theatre company, but the amount of times that somebody has got in touch with us and been like, oh, can you share this casting call? We've shared it with our little group chat of queerly performers, and someone's come back and been like, oh my God, I've got the job. Like, I think there are so many queer theatre companies that exist for people of all different intersections. And I think a lot of the time casting directors don't necessarily think about them, because like it does require a little bit of out of the box thinking, and it requires a bit more effort. But like not all of those, like not everyone who works with us is represented. Like let's do more open calls, but like yeah, find queer theatre companies who represent the kind of people you're looking for and reach out. Like it's always going to help.
Also, social media, as much as I hate sometimes, like social media is so good for that and reaching so many different people. Yeah, social media, so good for that.
Honestly, half the time of how I have a musical I've been writing called The Phase. Half the time I find people who are queer, I will just go through people's social media to be like, is there a gay flag? Is someone at Pride? Which is not, this is just like from a perspective of someone who's not had a budget to work with so far, or had the chance to do open casting calls. Like even if you're at a small production stage, you can still reach out to people. You can go to cabarets and stuff where people, like queer cabarets, because there will be queer performers, or like I know a bunch of people are doing top surgery fundraiser cabarets at the moment, which often center queer and trans performers. Me and Lucy have a theatre company where we do exclusively queer and trans shows to literally highlight performers. There are those places that you can go to look for those people as well. Yeah. I feel like we've covered that quite passionately, quite quickly. Musical theatre has a history, let's say, of including cis white male gay narratives, but there's been a distinct lack of stories about other members of the LGBTQ+ community, particularly from those who come from like oppressed communities who like experience intersectionality that impacts their access to the arts and things like that. So how can we take more steps to make sure that there are more narratives and more characters focused on those less heard stories, like the ace people, like the lesbians, like the bisexuals?
I think those stories do exist. I think that writing does exist, but it's what is it's what people put funding into, it's what people put up as shows. I think people are so used to audiences only wanting to see cis gay men in shows with sparkly clothing and big tap numbers and this and that, and it's like, yeah, that's great, and I'm so glad for like white gay men getting to have the representation, but also there are so many other stories that do exist. I know so many. I've got a friend who has written this like incredible play, but she can't get the funding for it because no one believes that could be popular. And it's like there are so many writers out there and so many musicians out there that have this body of work and have their incredible masterpieces, but no one believes in it because they don't think it will sell. So I think it's taking a risk, even though it's not a risk, it's literally just putting on good work. But it's taking a risk and funding stories that do already exist.
Mm-hmm. And there are loads out there. If you've been to Beam this year or in the past years, there's loads of stuff there. The Chamber Choir musical competition that happened recently had some amazing queer shows within that. There are some amazing queer writers, people in this call included. And I was not just picking up myself, Evie, you're an amazing writer as well. But but like there are so many stories that just don't get the funding. I agree.
I also think it comes down to like gatekeepers. Like realistically, most theatres are run by cis white men. Realistically, the people programming shows are cis white men. They're going to program shows about people who look like them. Like most writing is commissioned by them. Most writing is done by them. Like I think in order like to genuinely like get more of these stories out there, we kind of need to like a full restructure. Like we need more women at the top, we need more people of color at the top, we need more disabled people at the top. Like if realistically like the groups of people running theatres all look exactly the same, the work that's commissioned is going to look exactly the same. And also like people can't aspire to something that they don't see. Like for example, if you want to be a producer and you don't see any like queer female artistic directors of theatres, you're going to be like, oh okay, that's not something that I can do. And then it's almost like it's like a self-perpetuating myth. Like people believe like if you can't see something, you can't aspire to it. So I think a lot of it comes just break the system, break them all down. Let's fewer cis men at the top, please, and thank you.
I think what happens as well is naturally when that is the status quo, the stories that often that do get produced that come from more like diverse writers and producers and creators. The problem is that often the stuff that they assume is going to sell will often be the stuff that's commissioned, which often, more often than not, means that those stories involve the suffering of oppressed groups. And so it's often becomes about the exploitation of tragedy, rather than shows that just have, happenstance of queerness or, just tell stories that might not involve, the suffering of certain groups, but that tends to be what's marketable. So in terms of, as we said earlier, like taking the risk. And also I know that they can afford to take the risk because I see a lot of bad theatre that is about straight people or cis white men, like so much. So I know that they're not, they're like, oh, the work has to be top quality. Like, I know that you don't think that. Like, I know that that's not why you're turning on stuff down that is actually good, because I've seen the other stuff you've produced and it's bad. So I know that that's not actually true. So it's not an excuse. It's about like, and a lot of these producers are people that can actually afford to fail and can afford to take risks. I think often that's why actually you see a more, just natural production of more, interesting and eclectic shows at places like the Royal Court, for example, or just as an example, there's lots of different venues that have shorter runs of shows, and they will more likely pick stuff up and go with it because they have that flexibility. They know they have the money to take the risk. They're doing it for a month. They can do that, you know? So lots of theatres, I think a big problem is stagnancy and how long things run too. If something's running for like 7 years, like they're not going to make the room for, why would like some of these producers at the top go like, let's kick out this show that's been making money for 40 years and put in some, you know, some new queer writing, you know, like they're not going to do that. So I think it's again comes down to imagination and risk, but they just, it's very rare that you will see stories being you know, supported by people at the top if they're not at the expense of the suffering and exploitation of, you know, whatever group may be concerned, which is unfortunately the reality, I think.
To kind of go off that, like in terms of like trauma shows, I'm like so kind of tired of seeing very gay shows, especially within musical theatre. Like there are so many, as much as it's important to learn about the AIDS crisis, there are so many shows about the AIDS crisis which end with the two queer men, either one of them dying or both dying. Like for Falsettos, for example, it's one of my favorite shows, but equally there are quite a few shows where that happens, or like Rent and things like that. And I want to see shows about queer joy. I want to see some more happy shows that are not about coming out, that are just about people who happen to be queer dealing with other problems as well.
You know what's funny as well? Like all the queer people I know are the happiest people I know, and it's all the cis people in my life are like some of the worst people I know. So like, no offense to anyone who's like cisgender, but like we like exude joy and happiness. So like, why is it that we're only put into productions where we go through trauma every night, when that's not our entire narrative?
I think it's like really important that like we do explore like some of the terrible things our community has been through, right? Like the AIDS crisis, literally, like it was basically like a queer genocide. Like it happened because the government did not care about queer people, so they let this happen and they let people die. Like it's so important that those things are discussed, but I think the issue is like the volume. It's like if we were seeing that as 1 in 10 shows about queer people, that would be great, but the reality is like 8 out of 10 queer shows are ones which center trauma. Like I think we almost need a reset. We need to be like, okay, can we like ban the AIDS shows for like 5 years? Let's like get more exciting, happy stuff like going, flowing, and then we can like re-explore
like, yeah, I just don't want to see like any more bears, any more, as much as I love like Catholic trauma exploration, I'm like, that show is sad, is very, very sad and very, very doom and gloom. Or Heather's like, you know, I love my dead gay son. I'm like, oh, we can only have joy in death, like that sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's
joy
like we need to just, I want to move past that.
It was really fun.
In life.
It was really fun doing Bowman Cheerleader because it's just like the happy, like it's just like it's in a traditionally, sorry, the church bells tolling behind me. I'm like live right next to a church. It's very haunting. Speaking of Catholic exploration, it was really nice to do a show where the lesbians didn't die at the end, and also didn't end up just marrying men instead. And I think it also was very nice for a lot of young people who came to see the show, who were so used to seeing the inevitable dark conclusion of these storylines. I think it was encouraging. I think it also for audiences to go and see something where it's like, oh, there's hope. There's hope, and sometimes actually it does work out, and it's a lovely thing, and it's a good, and it's actually, as Nicole, as you say, like it is like it's fun, like it's fun. It's not just like repression and horror and fear. Like it is also just like there's great joy in queerness, and I think allowing there to be queer happy endings also allows people to see that it is not just an existence of fear. Like it's not, it is actually, and I also think just to laugh at the ludicrousness of people who like are intolerant you know, it's like, it's not even just offensive. It's just like, why? Like, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's like, it's like, it's a good thing sometimes to be mocking, you know, of those things, rather than just being like, I abhor it, of course, but like, it's ludicrous because it doesn't mean anything. And so it's based on, you know, it's based on nothing, on ideas that do not exist, on, you know, facts that are not true. And so I think it's more than just, you know, let's let the gay people have a happy time. It's about demonstrating that queerness is not a life of being afraid. Like, that's really not what it's about. And I think that it can be very dissuading to people, in terms of not just like coming out or whatever, but just, you know, it's an onslaught. And also I think this pertains to a lot of other, like, you know, areas as well. But I think when you have these deeply sad narratives at the forefront of the media all the time, when it comes to less like, you know, less palpable, more mundane issues, you tend to lose the interest of cisgender people. So if they're like, I know that it was really bad during AIDS, but like, you guys are happy now, right? Like, it's like, you know what I mean? I think when you have this onslaught of torture porn, as I like to call it, which I really like, I have a lot of issues with it in terms of, you know, television and film and theatre and, you know, all areas. But when you have these really graphic, awful explorations of history where, you know, people can go and be like, oh God, that was so terrible for them. Like, that was so awful back then. But now it's fine now. Like, look how bad it was then. It can't be that bad now. And I think it means that it swallows the actual like reality today of you know, of oppressed people and of minorities, and it makes it feel like it's like, oh, the problems are solved. You know, I think when you look back at those things, often what you get out of it is like, what a horrible past. At least that's not happening now. You know, I think that can be what it makes people feel safe. It makes people feel safe, and that they don't have to worry about it anymore because it was in the past, and it's something they can go, oh, how awful that now. It's like it's giving them a break.
But it's not always as well. You know, we still face, you know, conversion therapy is still legal in the UK and things like that, and that kind of narrative of, oh, it's all in the past, ignores the fact that there are still present issues that need battle, that we need allies for. Final question from me before we open to the floor for questions. What is one thing you wish people knew about being queer and working in your field? Like, what is one thing that you wish people to take away from this, that we haven't mentioned already?
I think one thing that's been very important to me and my queer journey, and as I'm discovering myself more and more, I think it's who you surround yourself with in the industry. I think should take priority. I mean, obviously yourself and your mental well-being and your entire wellness takes top priority, but I think under that, before the job, who you surround yourself with is the most important thing, because it's really hard. I'm not going to lie, it's hard to be a queer person in this industry, but it doesn't have to be hard. If you surround yourself with like-minded people, with other queer people, with extremely strong allies, you'll feel very grounded in who you are as a person, that whatever you do face in the industry, you can brush off and move on, and then assert yourself into spaces that do accept you. That's one thing that's become very apparent in my life. I think I've been always a small circle kind of person. And I think when I first joined the industry, I think I was very much I need to be friends with every single person, regardless of what their beliefs are, what they think of who I am as a person. And I was compromising my own mental well-being, and I was compromising my happiness just to please them. And I think the more I've focused on who I allow into my space, the happier and more true to myself I've become. And the more I feel it's affirming, like being myself. I feel like I'm completely, truly accepted by my people, my circle. So I think that's a really important thing to, especially if you're a queer person coming into the industry. I think reach out to people who are queer, because queer people are the best people in the world, and they will hold space for you, and if they can't hold space for you, you'll find someone else that it's chosen family. So I think reach out to people. I've made so many queer friends this year that are now like lifelong family. And if you aren't new to the industry, if you've been in the industry for a long time, allow yourself to meet new people, and don't get stuck in what seems like okay. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'll go next. Evie gave me a look of, I don't know what I'm going to say yet.
My old Megan.
I think just the importance of listening. Like, I think people go, oh, you're gay, you're in musical theatre. Oh my God, it's such a great gay space. Everyone's gay in musical theatre. And it's like, yeah, but I feel like it's so important to listen to people who are like, have a different like intersection of identities to you. Like, cis queer men, like, listen to women, listen to trans people, like, listen to people who don't share your experiences. Or I've learned how important like it is, like, running a theatre company for like people from those like minoritized genders, like making sure that we're really like centering and lifting up people of color, making sure we're centering and lifting up like neurodivergent people and disabled people. I think it's like, I think I've always been aware of it, but I've put it into action more than ever. Like, allyship is like something that you have to be conscious of every single day. And just because you're from a minoritized community yourself, that doesn't mean that your role as an ally is ever going to be over. Like, we all need to be like constantly lifting each other up, constantly fighting for the members of our community who are like less privileged than us. And I think that's like, it's an ongoing battle, and it's not always going to be easy. But I think, yeah, that's the most like that. I think that's what I'd pass on to myself like 5 years ago. Like, look after each other, basically.
That was kind of the point I was going to make, but
I can still. I have something that I want to talk about. Just from a writing point of view, I just want to like highlight the importance of intersectionality within queerness and queer stories. Like, I have maybe 4 queer shows that I have ideas for or are currently writing, and all of them involve very different storylines to do with queerness. I have a neurodivergent lesbian musical, because that I have a musical centered on bisexuality and polyamory, set in like it's a Robin Hood adaptation. I really hope to make that someday. Or The Phase, which is about young queer people, but equally like there is so many different stories within queerness, but equally there's going to be very different experiences of that queerness. Like, some people, I am someone who is ace as well as being queer, and that like also plays a really interesting part of my identity in writing queer shows. So yeah, just not assuming stereotyping, I think, is the thing, and thinking beyond what you perceive to be the box and talking to people like this, because you learn lots about different people's opinions and different people's interpretations of things. Evie, if you
feel like try to think. I don't want to be like, she's clearly just piggybacking off everybody else. No, I was gonna say, I think like there is and I think this even outside of just queerness, I think like generally speaking, something that is so important to recognize is like there is such power in the collective. There is no use, there is no point in bitterness or infighting, or it's such a waste of energy, because actually and that's not to say like, of course, like criticism and debate and these things are all very important, but I think we are often made to feel like we are against each other all the time in this industry. It's like, it is a competition. It is dog eats dog. It's like, it's very like there's a kind of viciousness bred into the industry that I think makes us all often feel quite alone. I think as I've talked to a lot of people who have said, it feels like a lonely place. And I think actually it's really important to recognize that there are much bigger forces at work. The person who's going next, like behind you in the audition room, is not your enemy. And I think particularly pertaining to queerness and queer performers, you are so much stronger together. Like, you are just like the And as Nicole's saying, you do have the ability to choose family, and you do have the ability to refuse to submit to the system that makes you feel like you are against everybody else, because you aren't. And actually, I think in the times when I've struggled most during whatever productions or professionally, I think when I actually find community, and when I have found a group of to stand with you, when you have that solidarity, that is when things change, and that is when people will listen, and that is when you are at strongest. You are not alone, and no one else is hoping that you fail. It is such a myth that is fed to us to make us weaker, and to make us more susceptible to manipulation and to falling in line. And that doesn't have to be necessary. You have a community of people who believe more in the art that's being made, and in the work that's being created, than in the divisions that seemingly exist. There's so much more at stake. And of course there are always going to be people you don't like, or people and things you rub up against, but that doesn't mean that I think division is weakness. So I think just stronger as a unit. I think I've forgotten that a lot, but it's important to remember.
I mean, it's one of my favorite things when I meet someone, if I'm at an audition and I meet someone who I don't know who's non-binary, I'm like, oh my God, another non-binary performer I can befriend. Like that's the way that I feel like we should all approach it, just being like, oh, another queer person who's like maybe having a similar experience to me, or like it's just creating those networks of support. And we are now open to questions from the chat. We have a couple that have popped through, but please get typing, send them in, and we'll have these for the next 15 minutes or so. We'll answer them. One question: how could a queer director focusing on or working on a queer focus show make sure the culture of the rehearsal room and backstage on the productions or is more queer inclusive? How can we work towards that?
So I think it almost goes back to what we were saying about making safe spaces. I think if right at the very start of the show, you're like, okay, here are my expectations. You make sure everyone's sharing their pronouns. You make sure that you cultivate a culture of inclusivity right from day one. I think that's really, really important. And also put your money where your mouth is. Make sure that as a director, you are actively supporting your performers. You are calling out nonsense when you see it. You are consistently pursuing allyship. All of those things are really important. But I think literally on day one, when everyone walks into the room, maybe just outline your expectations. Be this is going to be a queer inclusive space, this is what we expect of you. Be bold, and make it clear what you need.
I agree with Lucy.
Nothing to add.
I know, I'm just trying to think. I'm like, oh. Also, just I mean, this is more related to transness specifically. There are trans awareness training courses out there. I'm sure that there are probably also queer awareness training. It's not that I feel at this stage that we should be needing that, but there are ways to educate yourself before coming into the rehearsal room and requiring that of your cast. You should never be requiring of your cast that they educate you on the job. That is not their job on the job.
Yeah, I've really always appreciated when I've had directors ring me the week before starting something to check in about things. I've particularly had that as a neurodiverse person. I've had people ring and go just wanted to check about any boundaries, any particular things, any communication that can be set between us, so that that we can understand each other. And I think that can be expanded. I think always checking in with individuals before starting a process is quite a simple thing that can be done, but it means that people can enter a space and feel they're not just it's not going in with no knowledge. I think if you just have a 15-minute chat with someone on the phone in the week before a project and be let me know what you feel, you know what I mean? And then you can, you know, as I think as a director, it would be helpful to collect those, and then you don't feel like you're improvising, or you can concentrate on the work and what the project at hand, rather than feeling like, oh, I don't know, you know, if you have insecurities in that space, you can establish that. You can establish everything that needs to be established. Just checking in with everybody before, seeing how everybody's doing, and, you know, how they want to, you know, how they would feel comfortable approaching things. I think that would just be, I found that to be really helpful, and really, like, it's always made me feel very comfortable going into a space when I've had that beforehand, because I can go in and go like, they care, you know, they care, they like, I've you know, expressed in things that I accommodations or whatever, and you go in and it's a lot, you can take a deep breath and with confidence.
Mm-hmm. And even just checking in with language and stuff as well. Like I think you kind of touched on that slightly, just being like, checking if people are comfortable using the word queer, because that not everyone is comfortable with that. What language are people comfortable using? Because not everyone is going to have the same expectations.
Like Nicole was saying, when you're like talking about groups of people as well, being like ladies,
Mm-hmm.
like, and also like those, there are some terms which can be a little bit more like less clear. So things like, I will always be like, oh guys, without thinking, but like for some people that can cause real gender dysphoria. So like maybe even checking in about like what terms people are comfortable with. Like I know for a lot of non-binary terms, not a lot of non-binary people, there are some terms that like they find particularly triggering and make them really uncomfy. Like but also other people be like, yeah, I'm non-binary, but I also really identify with the term sexy lady. Like check with people.
Yeah. I personally love boy with an I at the end. I'm like, boy. Some people, I'm not gonna feel that.
I literally typed that on my phone right before this chat.
Boy.
Like, FaceTime my friend, I was like, I'm a skater boy.
Another question. What is your favorite piece of good representation? Like, what is your favorite piece of media that does a really good job of queer representation or queer storylines? Like,
I have
Lucy,
one coming.
Yeah,
Meg knows exactly what I'm going to say. It was the Pasadena Playhouse production of Little Shop of Horrors, where they cast MJ Rodriguez as Audrey. I just think it's so luscious. Like I remember watching it and being like, of course this makes sense. Like the story is like made so much more rich and beautiful by the fact that like she's a trans woman of color. Like it makes a lot of sense, like her character arc. It explains why like especially when trans women are like at disproportionate risk of like things like domestic violence, like her being in an abusive relationship makes so much more sense. And but also like it wasn't a huge part of her character arc. Like it was just like she was a trans woman who also like found love, and like yeah, I just really love it. Whenever I think about it, I get all like warm and cozy on the inside. I just think it's really, really clever and it's really beautifully done.
For me, it's a Strange Loop on Broadway right now.
Oh,
the soundtrack, the cast, the team behind it, like it's Black queer excellence, and I'm just need it. Like I'm craving it in London. So yeah, that's my obsession right now.
One of the best scores really of the last
really? Yeah,
it is it is. I've listened to it about 700 times. I'm obsessed with it. I think my favorite I mean it's a great show overall, but I think my favorite like song written in the 21st century that I think is the most I saw it and I said that it was my moment of realization. It was my moment of of relaxation into the reality, was when I saw Fun Home, and I think Changing My Major is one of the great queer, it actually makes you tear up. I think one of the great queer masterpieces is that song, because it is just utter it is rapture and joy. It is like a discovery that is, and it's a really kind of amazing show, and in so many ways, and I love the thing as a whole, but I think that moment of of the joy of discovery, I think, is quite unique, and having an ode to realize it, an ode to coming out the closet for yourself, as I think that is just bliss. It's just bliss. I don't think it's euphoria. And I think anyone anyone I've shown it to people who I'm like aren't the most open-minded people, or the people who I would feel more uncomfortable talking about that stuff with, and they're like blown away. And because I think it is so like it communicates something that is so unique and special. It's a masterpiece.
I want to just give a little shout out to a non-musical theatre example as well. I'm obsessed with She-Ra and the Princess of Power, not only as a piece of queer media aimed at children, but also just as a world of imagining of like, if we've talked about imaginative like queerness and stuff, or like thinking outside the box, just creating that whole world which feels so automatically open and queer and accepting. It just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy, and I love it so much. And I would really recommend. It's got a bunch of like different kinds of queer representation and different kinds of like presentation as well of the different characters. And it's aimed at children, which we need more queer children pieces, because children should understand about queerness, because it doesn't just happen at a certain age. People know that they are queer from a very young age. People will have parents who are queer. It's a really important thing to me that I think children should be educated on this. So yeah, I'm gonna check if we have any more. Again, keep sending in your questions, chat. Question. Everybody's talking about Jamie as one of the most successful new British musical theatre shows of recent years, and centres the narrative of a young gay man who wants to be a drag queen. In a parallel reality where it had to be about a young lesbian who wanted to be a drag king, what industry production adjustments do you think such a show would require to have a similar chance of popularity?
What a question.
Really good question. It requires maybe more thought than like us being like,
I think first thing I want to say is there's a line and everybody's talking about Jamie that fills me with rage, and I have to say it now because it makes me so angry. And it's the bit where he's like, a man in a dress is to be laughed at, but a drag queen is to be feared, and I hate it, and it makes me so angry. So I just want to put that out there because it fills me with rage. In answer to the actual question, I think the sad reality is, genuinely, in the current climate, I think exactly the same show transposed, featuring a woman, focusing on a woman, focusing on a drag king, like it wouldn't be as commercially viable. It wouldn't be made. It wouldn't be made, but it wouldn't be successful, because like drag, as in like classic like female, like male to female drag, is like having a real cultural moment at the moment. Like I think, yeah, A, it wouldn't exist, but B, I don't think it would be commercially successful, because I don't think audiences are ready. So I think what we would need to do is kind of build in shows that are like a little bit more cozy and queer first. Like one of my favorite pieces of queer media is Imagine Me and You, and it's like literally every rubbish rom-com you've ever watched, but it just so happens to have two women at the center of it, and I absolutely love it. And I feel like I think we need more of that. I think we kind of need to warm audiences up a little bit first. And it's not that I wouldn't love that show, I absolutely would, but I don't think audiences are in a space where they're ready for that quite yet.
I don't think they understand what it is. Like, I think there's like, it's very interesting how like little exposure to like drag king culture is like at all in mainstream. Like it's barely exists. It's kind of, I genuinely, it's kind of sad that my first thought was like, that show wouldn't exist. Like it wouldn't be viable. But
I think I was going to say, I think it's as well because people see women dressing up in male clothes as less radical.
Yeah, totally.
As like men dressing up in feminine clothes, or like trying to find their femme gay side compared to women finding their butch side. It's not like people don't draw the same parallels to those things as well.
Yeah, it's less like, it's less like obscene. Do you know what I mean? It's more like, it's like, oh yeah, reverting to like the male, which is the normal and the like the cool thing that everyone does. Whereas if it's a man, like I think even on Drag Race, when there was a whole debate about like, cis women doing Drag Race, and people were just like, I don't understand. Like
the misogyny that came out of that was quite something.
It was crazy. People just don't understand. They're like, but it has to be man dressed as woman. I don't understand. Like that's what it is, and that's the only thing that I understand. So that's what drag is. So I think it's like baby steps a little bit. Unfortunately.
It is that thing of just people not understanding that drag is a liberation as well of all gender. It's like that's what the aim of it is to do, is to destroy the box of gender and destroy perceptions. Whereas most people just say, oh, people having fun on the other side of the spectrum. That's not what it is at all.
No.
On that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Where can people find you, folks? Lucy, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
So if you want to find me specifically, I am Lucy Says Smile on Twitter and Instagram. But also if you want to check out Queerly Productions, we are at Queerly Prod on Twitter and Instagram. And it would be lovely to see you all.
Amazing. Nicole, where can we find you?
I'm on Insta, Twitter, all of the things as Nicole Raquel _D. And yeah, come and see me in the show. That's all the self-promotion I have at the moment.
When are you, where are your next like few locations?
We're in Canterbury right now. I mean, the show's
really?
Yeah.
But the show's I'm coming next week, like 100%.
Well, the show's not on right now. It's cancelled tonight. But let me know by the end of the week. I'm sure we'll be back. And then we're in Plymouth. So yeah, but literally the tour's going on until like next March. So
plenty of time.
Come and see it.
Evie, where can we find you?
I'm on all those things as well under Evie Rose Lane, but it's Evie, just the letters, like Katie Shanstall, the OG pop lesbian, by the way. Suddenly I see it's a lesbian song. Bet people didn't know that when they were singing it all the time at the bar.
It's a great little fact. I love that song. That's just a little coming out. Oh. And you can find me at Meg McGrady or www.megmcgrady.co.uk if you really want to find out my website and find out some of my other work that I do. But thank you all so much, and we'll hopefully see you for the next panel in a couple of weeks. Thank you for coming.